Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the Haley Public Library. Tonight is the second talk in our Water series, which is focusing on water rights and the law, known as first in time is first in right doctrine. Our presenter tonight is Kevin Lakey, District 37 Watermaster, who I will introduce to you in just a moment. I always like to feature a couple of books that we have here at the library. Here is one by an old friend of mine, actually. It's called The Snake River, Window to the West by Tim Palmer. He's a conservation writer, a very good conservation writer. And in this book, he travels the full length of the Snake River from the springs that form it up in the northeastern part of Idaho, all the way to the confluence with the Columbia River, and just talks about where the springs are, where the dams are, where the communities are. What's really, so you get to know the Snake River kind of like an old friend, and he's a great storyteller. Another book that I would like to feature tonight is one on a topic that Kevin will be touching on. It's called A Little Dam Problem. And it's by a former Republican Attorney General who worked with a Democratic governor on a very controversial legal situation that, like I said, Kevin will be talking about the importance of that decision. But we have that book in the library. And another book that he mentioned just before we went live was one that I featured in the last water talk that we had, which is Cadillac Desert by Jim Reisner. Is that right? Is that the first name is correct? Reisner's his last name anyway. Mark Reisner. There we go. Which is an older book. It's in the early 1990s, but very relevant. He was a very astute observer of water in the West. And as we know, if we've lived in the West very long, water is essential. We live in a very, very dry climate. So without further ado, I will introduce Kevin. Kevin graduated from the University of Idaho with a BS in Agricultural Education. Since the fall of 2003, he has served as the Watermaster for Water District number 37, which is under the jurisdiction and authority of the Idaho Department of Water Resources. His area of responsibility encompasses the Malad River Basin, an expansive area from the Snake River Canyon rim east of Hagerman to the North Fork of the Big Wood River north of Ketchum. His job is overseeing the allotment of water and ensuring that Idaho's water laws are being followed. He lives in Gooding, Idaho with his wife Tina and their daughter Donovan. So warm virtual welcome to you, Kevin. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know that this is a very busy season for you. And there's a lot of hot news in the press now about water, and so thank you so much for taking the time and just helping us to understand this really important topic.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, it is a hot topic. Hot weather, no water. Yeah, so it's a hot topic. Yeah. Can you see the screen, or do I need to do anything different with that?
Nope, the screen looks great.
Okay.
And I'll mute myself right now, and then just, as I mentioned, if people want to ask questions or provide comments, please put that in the chat, which is at the bottom of your monitor. Just click on it. There's a box at the bottom that you can post your question in, and then I'll monitor those questions and gently interrupt Kevin in his presentation.
Yeah, so I'm guessing when you unmute yourself, your little mic there will go from red to white, so I can kind of see also when you want to get in. Yeah. 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 Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Yeah. As Kristen said, if you have any questions at all, jump in, because sometimes this subject can get rather deep. And I don't want to get into the weeds on some stuff, or maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to go at a little more depth in some other areas. So yeah, if you got a question, just speak up. But this first screen here, it's kind of loaded with terms you may not know, or you may have seen some of them before. So, and I won't know a lot of your backgrounds and your knowledge base. So that might direct where we're going in a lot of cases. So I'll talk a little bit about water rights and maybe some other stuff if we have time at the end that are water related, but maybe relevant to some of you out there and where you're living. And, you know, if there's things that are going on that you don't understand, so just speak up. So yeah, a water right is the right of a person to divert waters from public sources and put them to a beneficial use. And we'll talk about what diverting is. Well, actually diverting is just taking the water out of a source. That's diverting and putting them to beneficial use, putting that water to beneficial use. And we'll talk a little bit about that and in accordance to your priority date. And we'll probably end up talking a lot about that, priority date and seniority of water and all that stuff. So, but Idaho water is owned by the state. So the state of Idaho owns it, and it might come in from a stream or a lake or a pond or just whatever, but it has a source and the state of Idaho owns it. But water users have a right to use that water if appropriated, and appropriation is just putting it to work. So as Kristen mentioned, the Snake River, that Snake River book, it talks about the dams and how the Snake River is worked, and it's used for irrigation or hydropower. So that's what appropriation means. It's a kind of a big word for it. It's just putting the water to work. And so when they put that water to work, it establishes that there's a water right for it. And the biggest thing concerning a water right is usually its senior priority. So senior priority doctrine, Idaho water law is based on the appropriation doctrine. I'm just reading the screen there at the bottom, because water rights in Idaho are based upon, you know, when that water was put to work. And Kristen mentioned earlier, the appropriation doctrine has also been called first in time, first in right. And because of that priority date, it will determine who gets the water in a shortage. Like this year, we're in a drought, so senior priority becomes very crucial to understand that. The last sentence there, a water right under Idaho water law can be established only by appropriation. It means putting it to work. And once established, it can be lost if not used. Now, I know there's a fella in the audience that he and I argue about this all the time. The state has kind of went back and forth on whether you can lose a water right or not. So it has been that case in some places. There has been a lot of questions about use it or lose it is another term that people might use. But right now, the state is not really enforcing that, to be honest. If you have not used your water right, they allow you a lot of opportunity to put it back to use, let's say. Yeah. So let's see, Kristen, I'm hitting my enter key, but that slide will not move.
Okay, try moving your cursor to the lower left part of your kind of PowerPoint image. There should be a double arrow that comes out like this.
Okay.
Higher than that. There you go.
Dang it.
Did you try hitting enter?
Yeah, still not working.
Did you try your arrow keys?
Yeah, still not working.
Well, that's kind of a pain in the neck. Well, what can we do?
I'm trying to escape back out also to go to the slideshow, but go back there.
So I'm going to stop your sharing and let you share your screen again.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try that. Like I said, it seems like there's always something.
Okay, I'm just going to go from the beginning.
Okay.
There we go. There.
No. Okay, yay.
Got it. Okay. So first in time, first in right. Basically, as settlers started coming west, they started putting this water to work. Maybe it was for irrigation, maybe it was for mining. So anyway, they put the water to work, and in the Big Wood Basin above Magic Reservoir, farmers started filing on water and putting it to work. June 10th, 1880 is the oldest priority date in the Wood River above Magic. And those water rights go all the way out to May 14th of 1913. And that's in the Big Wood River alone. Now, Water District 37 also manages Silver Creek and the Littlewood below where Silver Creek comes into the Littlewood. But on the Big Wood River alone, we have priority dates from 1880, June 10th. And there's a guy, don't know anything about him, but I'm guessing he was a farmer. His name was James Rencher. And he started farming or using his water right in underneath the Minimore mine is where that water right still exists today, is in the Broadford Slough area or along Lower Broadford Road. That's where that water right still exists. And then right after him, the Black brothers, they are kind of right in line. I don't have the names here, but they started a ranch down on what is called now the Heart Rock Ranch. And those water rights are still there on that property. And they're right about the same age as the James Rencher right. So, and then farmers just kept coming to the valley. And by 1913, there was 900 cubic feet per second of water that had a water right established. But it's kind of interesting if you were to look at the water rights from 1880 to 1884, there's 400 CFS of water rights. So the farmers were extremely busy in that first, as the valley started to be developed from mining and ranching. In the first 4 years, there was 400 CFS of water already appropriated. So, and interestingly enough, the Haley gauge on the Big Wood River this morning was 400 CFS. We are delivering priority dates of 1886 and senior. But I expect in the next few days, we will be shutting off the 1886 and the 1885, and we will get into the 1884. So that matches just about right with what we're seeing. At Haley right now, we will only be able to deliver the 1884 rights all the way through. So those, go ahead, Kristen.
Oh, I just had a question about the 900 cubic feet per second.
Yeah.
Is that like today to fill all the water rights on the Big Wood River, like today, June 17th? The river would need to hold or be flowing at 900 cubic feet per second. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you.
So we only have 400. So we're down to we're going to be right close to 1884 priority dates in the next few days. So yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So then the question, well, how did those farmers, how did anybody know that they had an 1880 right or an 82? So in 1908, so like what, 28 years after James Rencher came to town, they realized, hey, we got issues and we got to establish who has what water. So a judge by the last name of Frost, he was in charge of the proceedings, and they had a big court case. And you can imagine if they're trying to file water on 900, well, actually those young rights were in 1913. So in 1908, those rights weren't even around yet. But from 1880 to say 1886, all those farmers, all those miners out there, they were getting letters, typed out probably on a key typewriter, delivered to the Postal Service, how long that took. And then they had to go testify and say, yeah, I was here in June of 1880, and they probably would have had some affidavit that proved it. Maybe they had a neighbor or something come in. So the Frost decree said, yeah, James Rencher has that right. The Black brothers have this right. John Doe has that right. And they went through the whole process in 1908 of identifying who had what water. But so that everything went pretty well, except probably in dry years, they had to go back and argue about who had what water. And then in 1987, they started the Snake River Basin Adjudication. And that basically started because the book that Kristen mentioned, the Little Dam Problem, what happened was, I don't know all the particulars, but I think it had something to do with the Swan Falls Dam. It's out by Murphy. It's out in the desert, kind of south of Boise. And Idaho Power has a power right at the Swan Falls Dam, and that power was used to generate power for the mines at Silver City, Idaho. So they had developed the mines in Silver City, needed the power to run them. So Idaho Power had the dam there. The right was in 1908, and that right was not being completely filled. And so Idaho Power said, hey, we're going to call on those rights. And that meant like every groundwater right in the southern part of the state that, you know, we raised potatoes and hay and corn and cows, and those were in jeopardy of being shut off because Idaho Power wasn't getting their right to the Swan Falls Dam. So that basically kicked off the Snake River Basin adjudication, and basically all the water rights in the Snake River in southern Idaho had to go through the whole court proceedings again. So that's a very complicated process. It started in '87, but the adjudication really didn't come to the Wood River Valley until about 2003. My first year was when they first started taking testimony from water users in the Wood River Basin. So it took a long time. It didn't finalize till about 2013 or 2015. So it took several years to do it all, to go back through all the water rights and establish who had what. So that's basically how they really got set in stone, all these water rights from 1880 all the way up through some groundwater rights that were drilled, or the wells were drilled in like the 1970s. So that's how they get adjudicated or decreed. So we have first in time, first in right. Like I said, when there's normal conditions or there's plenty of water, we have some water users. We have 20 CFS in the river now, let's say, or in this particular stream. And Mary has an 1880 right, and she's taken 10 CFS out of that 20, or there's 20 units. Or yeah, maybe I shouldn't say CFS, but anyway, there's 10 units out of the 20, that leaves 10 going by Mary. And some of that water that she took out may go back to the river. If it were like flood irrigation, something like that, it might go back to the river. So now there's 15 in the river. There was 10, now there's 15. Now Joe, he has a priority date of 1870 and a right to take out 10 CFS. So he takes his 10 out, and now there's 5 left in the river. But Joe, he has some return flows also, perhaps. And so his 5 goes back and adds to that original 5, or that 5 that was going past his diversion point. And now we've got 10 CFS total, and Fred has a right with a priority date of 1900, and he takes all that water. So it's dry going past his point of diversion, but his return flows give 5 back to the river. So now, so there's no real problem with senior priority. There's enough water in the system. Everybody's good. Everybody's getting all their water, but it's then you go to 2021 and things aren't so good anymore. We don't have enough water to go around. So now that instead of 20 at the very top of the system, I'm going to go back. Let's see if I can go back. Yeah, so there was 20 at the top of the system before, but now there's only 10. So we're dry, or we're drier.
And maybe
So,
Kevin, use your pointer to point out some
Okay.
of those
Sure.
numbers that you're talking about.
Okay, good. Thanks. So now we've only got 10. And so there's not enough water to deliver to Mary, because Joe down here, he has a 10 unit water right, and he's 10 years older than Mary with an 1880. So she can't use any water. So the Watermaster comes by and says, Mary, I'm sorry, but we have to turn you off so that Joe can get his water because he's a senior user. So the 10 goes by Mary's head gate. Of course, she has no return flows because she's not irrigating and returning any water back. So the 10 makes it down the stream to Joe. He's the senior user here. He takes it all the water that's in the river, and the river is dry there now. There's no water left, but Joe has some of the water that would go back to the river from his place. Now, and this is flood irrigation that this example is talking about. And I'll try to get into the groundwater and surface water connection as we talk about this a little bit, I hope. But and maybe I should talk about it here after I finish this slide. But so Joe has water that goes back. Now there's 5 CFS in the river down here. Fred is junior, or he has a younger water right than Mary. She has a water right that's 20 years older than Fred. But since there's water in the river, she can't get it anyway because she's upstream, and now there's water down here, and Fred can divert 5 CFS. He had a right, I think, of 10, in the last slide. Let me go back. Yeah, Fred had a right of 10, but there's only 5 in the river anyway, so he can take 5. Now he can't call on water from Joe because Joe is older than him anyway, so he can't call on Joe's water. Joe's a senior, so Fred can take 5, and the river would go dry right there below his head gate, but he's going to put 2.5 back, or Fred is. He's going to put 2.5 back into the river. So go
Kevin,
ahead, Kristen.
yeah, we do have a question. Someone's
Yeah.
asking, what if they all have the same priority year?
Good question. Really good question. So, and let's say there was only 10 and they all had the same priority date. So, and it would depend on the volume of the right, but what the Watermaster would likely do is figure out the percentage. And so, if Mary had 10, Joe had 10, and Fred only had 5, we would have 25 CFS of water, but only 20 coming in. Let's use that example. We cut by percentage, and then each would get a percentage of their right. So let's say I'm going to only deliver 50% of your right because that's all the water we got. So then if you had a 10 unit water right, you would only get, what did I say, 50%? So you'd only get 5. And let's say you had a 5 CFS right, you'd only get 2.5. So yeah, that's a good question. We cut by percentage.
So, and the question was about the same priority year. Does it just go by year, or if somebody got a priority in January, but somebody else got it in November of the same year, does that factor into it, or does it only go by the actual year?
It goes down to the day. So there are water rights in the Littlewood that some of them are April 1st and others are April 6th. So the April 6th is junior to the April 1. So it actually goes to by the day. Yeah. And there are water rights that are within days of one another that, yeah, if you're a senior by a day. So yeah, if your grandpa was that pioneer coming across, if you got his water first, that's the way it is today. Yeah. Good question. Yeah. It's down to the day. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to stop. I'm going to kind of get into the weeds a little bit and try to relate this to groundwater a little bit, and then we may have more questions later. But so, like I said, the surface water rights in the Wood River Valley, they were first decreed or had priority dates from 1880. And then everybody was fully appropriated up into 1913, but there was still water available even. So that's why Magic Reservoir was built, is that Magic Reservoir has a priority date of like 1905 or 1908. And so it was what Magic Reservoir was capturing all that excess water that was coming out of the Wood River Valley and putting it to use down there. And so Magic Reservoir has like a 1908 priority date. And so anybody younger than 1908 has to release their water when Magic is not full. So we had their first farmers into the valley, and then we had Magic. Well, then in the 1950s, they said, you know what, we're having such great times and there's plenty of water. We're going to start drilling wells in the Bellevue Triangle, and we're going to take even more water out of the system. So all those priority dates on wells, like I said, the oldest ones are 1950. So, and then they kept drilling wells through the 1960s and 1970s, and even up into the 1980s, they were still drilling some. So now, we've gone through some dry years over the last 30 or more, because 1977 was kind of one of the first really bad years in the valley. And then it was just kind of an anomaly. But then starting in the late 80s, early 90s, it started to dry out a little more. And now, so like since 2013, if we counted 13, 14, 15, 20, 21, we're probably in the last 10 years, we're probably at 5 years out of 10 have been dry. So now they're saying, you know what, that groundwater pumping in the Bellevue Triangle may be injuring senior surface water users down around Ridgefield and Shoshone. They have water rights from 1883. And so should a groundwater right with a 1950 priority date be allowed to divert, and when an 1883 is off? So that's the big battle right now, and the questions that are trying to be solved with all these proceedings over the last 2 weeks. I've I testified last week with a lot of other water users on both sides, arguing the case. So it gets very complicated because then, okay, well, how is a stream related to the aquifer below it? And will it come out, or will it come out in time? Or, so it gets extremely complicated trying to manage both groundwater and surface water as one system. So that may raise some more questions as we go. So feel free to go out there and ask for more questions on that if you need to.
Yeah, and I'll just say that last week, Dr. Jim Bartolino he's just retiring from the U.S. Geological Survey, did an excellent talk on the Wood River Valley Aquifer, and he has great charts, great charts, and great
graphics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that can give you a really good sense of how interrelated and complex and yeah, it just feeds right into what Kevin was just saying about these proceedings that are going on right now.
Yeah.
So that's on our website.
Yeah, whatever Jim said, if you don't understand me, go try to find the recording or whatever, because Jim's extremely knowledgeable about the aquifer and how it relates to the stream flows. Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically senior priority in a nutshell. Pretty quick lesson there, but that's it. I mean, if you have the oldest right, you're the user that gets it when the stream. But we're in some tough times, and so we're trying to solve that. Like, how do we get that water to the senior user if we have to? So, but there's other elements of a water right besides senior priority doctrine. When you put that water to work, there is priority date. That's what we've been talking about. There's the diversion rate, and the state of Idaho deals in cubic feet per second. So 1 cubic foot of water, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, moving by a certain point every second. That's cubic feet per second. It's about 450 gallons a minute. Some people might understand that a little more if they have a well or sprinkler system. The total volume is also an element of your water right. How much water can I use in a season? And they'll limit that, especially on groundwater rights. They limit total acre feet. An acre foot is just 1 foot of water standing on 1 acre. So that's 1 acre foot. It's about 325,000 gallons. They also legally describe where a water right is taken from its source, on a PLS. They do also list it by lat and longs, or latitude and longitude nowadays. Where you put the water to work, so where it's taken out of the stream, where you put the water to work, they'll describe that legally. The source, they list where the water comes from, and a water right number you'll have. So there's a little table there that's a couple of water rights that I used to own and now currently own. So the first one was a water right I owned in a well at Ridgefield. I've since sold that place, but so that the water right number for that particular piece of water that I was using is 37. That recognizes the basin that it's in. And then the sequence number. And Kristen asked me the other day when we were kind of practicing this, she said, well, what does the sequence number have to do with anything? And I really don't know. It has you can recognize some trends about how they might have developed that sequence number, but I don't really know how it is. Sometimes the older water rights have smaller numbers, but not always. It just depends on what has happened to the right over the last 50 years. And it has been decreed. So when it says decreed, it has gone through some kind of a court process, and the judge has put his stamp on that water right saying, yep, this is a good water right, it's valid. So that well, that 37-10,680, it was drilled in August 1st of 1960. So that's the date it has on it, its priority date. So obviously it's really young compared to surface water in the area. I can divert 0.02 CFS, so that's about 9 gallons a minute, not very much. And yeah, and that particular well there is 500 feet deep. And there are wells in the Richfield area that are like 700 feet. So, and those wells are not attached to the Silver Creek Aquifer or the Bellevue Triangle Aquifer. So that's just deep water, and it's expensive to pump. So it is a groundwater source. Yeah, it's being pumped out of groundwater. That's the source. The use is domestic. So that's for your house and home use. You could also irrigate a half an acre with a domestic well. and before anybody asks the questions, yeah, I think there are wells in the Wood River Valley that are pumping and irrigating more than a half an acre. That's an ongoing battle that the Department of Water Resources fights throughout the state, that is an issue. So domestic wells do irrigate over half an acre at times. Anyway, we sold that to a guy named Fred Saunders. And so he owns that water right now, and that's the name of it. So and then there's the second water right is the well right that I currently have in Gooding. I live in Gooding, and so that's my domestic right. Now, I would point out, I own 5 acres in Gooding, and so I have my domestic well, but I also have 5 acres of Canal Company water delivered through the American Falls Reservoir District number 2. So there, a lot of times there'll be combined waters on a piece of property, and I'm one of those guys. I have Canal Company water on my land, plus the well that I use around my house. So those are the elements of a water right. Priority date is just one of them, but it's the biggest part. But there are other things that, and so if you're trying to divert more, let's say you're in priority, but you're trying to divert more than you have coming, then yeah, the Watermaster will step in and say, can't do that. We need to only use the water you have coming. And you need to put it to the use where it's supposed to be and for the use it's supposed to be. So those are the elements of a water right. So I threw these in. If there's more questions about water rights, we can go to that. If not, this might be a topic that some of you are dealing with. Right now, I mean, Blaine County has been growing since, I don't know, 1960, maybe 1880. It's been growing, and it's still growing, and it's growing. It seems like even faster over the last 10 years. And we have people that come in and they may not understand land ownership issues. So I'll just read this so I can keep on track, because I might not be able to describe it as well if I just try to talk about it. The easement for an irrigation ditch supplying water to a neighboring property, maybe that's somewhere around you, is likely not written into surrounding property deeds. So you may have bought a property and there was no easement listed. There may have been an easement for a neighbor's driveway or an Idaho power line. There's going to be an easement described in your deed when you buy that property. Ditches are not that way. And I guess it's because in the early days, farmers were developing land before there was actually somebody even described the land legally. And so they were building those ditches and they just built them. And they didn't have time to necessarily go back and describe where they were. So Idaho came up with a statute. I don't remember the number, but it's basically ditches have an implied easement. So when you buy a property in Idaho and there's a ditch crossing the property, the ditch has an implied easement. You cannot do anything to that ditch without the ditch owner's permission. And the ditch owner can cross your property to perform maintenance on that ditch, and you can't stop them. They have the right to cross your property, to clean the ditch, to maintain it, whatever they need to do. One of the biggest issues we run into is the state statute does not specify the size of the easement, but the easement is wide enough to, quote, perform the necessary work on the ditch. So if a ditch is crossing your property, you can't dam it up and make a water feature out of it. It needs to pass through your property. You don't have a right to dam it up, like for aesthetics. That would be a beneficial use the state recognizes for aesthetics, but likely you probably don't have an aesthetic right on a canal or a ditch. But then the ditch owner can cross your property. If the ditch is, let's say, 5 or 6 feet wide, and the owner cannot keep that ditch clean with a hand shovel and a pair of irrigating boots, he needs to be able to cross your property with an excavator maybe. He has the right to do that. Now, it does say perform the necessary work on the ditch. Sometimes there might be a little spoil that comes out of the ditch, a pile of cattails or mud or whatever. He should be cleaning that up a little bit, but the statute is really vague. So this is an issue right now in Blaine County, is that, you know, people who maybe come in from out of state don't realize that you have the ditch owner has the right to cross the property. He has the right to clean it, and you do not have the right to make alterations to that ditch without him saying so, or her saying so. Yeah, Kristen?
Yeah, I have some friends in the Deerfield area, and they just have a little ditch. I mean, you could hop across it if you kind of made a couple long strides. You know, it's like having a little creek in your backyard. It gurgles and whatnot. So
Yeah.
so you may be familiar with that area, but when you talk about the ditch owner, what do you mean by the ditch owner if it isn't the homeowner that it's passing through?
Good question. So in that case, the Hiawatha Canal Company actually owns that ditch, and they deliver to a multitude of different users within their company boundary. So the Hiawatha Canal Company would be the ones performing maintenance on that. They're in charge of delivering that water. It wouldn't be so let's say in that little ditch that's running through your friend's land, there might be 10 different people that own water rights in that little ditch on downstream. So that would be a hassle for 10 different users to come up through your yard and with a shovel and cleaning it out every 2 or 3 days. Yeah. So it's the Hiawatha Canal Company that would do that maintenance. They're the ones in charge of that. Yeah. If it were an individual, like a lot of times within canal companies, you might have just one individual downstream, and he would be the one that would be coming up through there and doing the maintenance. Yeah.
If that individual had the right
Right. If
kind of
that was
right to that ditch or whatever.
right. Yeah. If
Yeah,
he had the
okay.
water rights in that ditch, yeah, he would be the one performing it. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's also controversial in farming areas. People that move in don't necessarily know what's the legality behind those ditches.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from someone. Not sure if you would have an answer for this, but with the severity of drought increasing, is there an estimate of how many gallons of water are lost to evaporation in these open ditches? Also, why are farmers irrigating during the day when there's maximum evaporation?
Okay, so the first question was the ditch loss. So
Mm-hmm.
that will vary obviously with temperature. Also, it will vary depending on the soils that the ditch crosses and also the amount of water. So let's say in the early part of the year, and there's a lot of water in a ditch, the losses are usually greater. And then as the season progresses and there's maybe less water in the ditch, it varies. For the most part, average, the Wood River Valley is a little worse than other parts of the district, but it's usually sometimes around 20% loss from a starting point to an ending point. But like I say, that varies depending on how much water is in the ditch and the temperatures. If you have any other questions, I can try to go into a little deeper than that, but that's kind of on average 20% loss. Now, let's say, okay, well, we want it, and I'll get to the watering at night in just a second, but let's say, well, let's try to get rid of some of that ditch loss or even evaporation loss. Let's put it in a pipe. And you could do that. But then the question becomes, okay, if the Silver Creek Aquifer, the Bellevue Triangle Aquifer, receives that ditch loss and you piped it, now there's a possibility that you may have just injured the Silver Creek Aquifer. Now, no one has the responsibility to remain inefficient. If you wanted to pipe your ditch or whatever and wanted to remove those losses, you can. It may injure the aquifer, but that's not your fault. You're just trying to be as efficient you can. But that is a question that gets brought up sometimes. So, Kristen, do you want me to answer the irrigating at night question, or did you have another question?
I have another little question, actually.
Yeah.
But thank you. And my growing up place, my folks had a little ditch like I was describing earlier, and the across the street farmer wanted to pipe it through our property, and it caused some hard feelings, but my dad said, no, don't want to do that. But so thank you for helping me to understand the legality around that. Some ditches are concrete instead of earth, and I'm guessing that some of the water loss, well, I don't know, talk to us a little bit about water loss through the sides of the ditches and whether putting them in a concrete kind of trough is helpful.
Yeah, I've never really seen the studies on it, but just from anecdotal observation, cement was becoming really popular, I think, like in the 1960s and 70s. And there was a lot of it put in the more expensive row crop areas, like around Twin Falls, even up around the Treasure Valley, around Boise and all that land. Ada County and Canyon County, they started putting in those cement ditches, but then you have an issue. I mean, cement is rigid. And then, so if you have wet ground kind of underneath them, because they might have irrigation right beside the ditch. And so in the fall, when that irrigation stops, that ground is probably still wet. Or maybe you have, precipitation starting in September and October, and now the ground around that ditch is wet. And now then in December and January, it gets cold. And so you have freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing around a cement ditch. And pretty soon that land expansion, or, heaving and sinking, those cement ditches have a tendency to crack and break. And then you have a lot of maintenance issues. Okay, now we're gonna have to go back in and seal that, maybe build a new ditch or put tar or whatever on a cement ditch. So they had their place at one time, but there's not a lot of new ones going in. Everybody's going to plastic pipe if they want to try to solve, seepage or evaporation issues. Yeah. But as far as irrigating at night, so some crops can't be irrigated at night. So like beans will mold, and there's disease problems with irrigating some crops at night. And then just the fact that evaporation, plants evaporate a ton of water during the day, and at night it goes down, but it's still happening. And so maybe you're just trying to keep up with irrigation during the daytime and the effects that, temperatures and wind are having on that. So sometimes farmers just cannot afford to stop. They just have to keep irrigating to keep up with evaporation and plant uses. So yeah, that's a good question, but it just won't work. Now, if you're irrigating a garden or something like that, or a yard, maybe even on 2 or 3 acres, you might be able to get away with it. But when you're trying to spread a certain amount of water over 100-acre pivot or something, you just usually have to just keep them running, and they just can't afford to shut off. Yeah.
I think your analogy with the beans, just as a regular gardener myself, I don't like to water at night because my beans and my peas will get powdery mildew on them. So
yeah, that's the problem. So some crops, and corn is a big water drinker, and so they have to keep ahead of that alpha. That's one of the bad things about Idaho. One of the great places we raise crops, with our dairy industry, a lot of southern Idaho farms are raising crops for the dairy industry. So that's alfalfa hay and corn. And early in the season, they're not big water users, but once it hits, say 85 degrees, they are big water drinkers until middle of August, 1st of September. So they have to keep the water poured to them. Yeah. So anyway, ditch easement, it can be a problem for a lot of people around in the Blaine County area, especially in around Bellevue and Haley. Not so much in Ketchum because there's just not a lot of ditches up there. But there's one ditch in Ketchum that I get calls on it a lot. Just people were wanting to build around it, and so they're looking for guidance on how do they build around the ditch or whatever. But that is an issue in the area. Also, so with the groundwater, I'll say, versus surface water issue, and new owners coming to town, an issue that we deal with as a water district comes up a lot is that people don't understand the difference between a water district and an irrigation district and a groundwater district. And why do all three of those want my money? Because they all cost money to manage. So I'll talk a little bit about that too, as far as some people might not understand what's going on with those if they're new water users or no water owners. So water districts that's me. That's Water District 37. And water districts are responsible for overseeing the delivery of water from the sources. So within the basin or water district, along with managing the ownership records of water rights in that district. So that's what we do. And so if you're a new water right owner, and you don't have a lot of water, maybe you've got, let's say, a fraction of a CFS, you're probably going to get an $80 assessment from Water District 37. And that's our minimum charge. If you have just a little bit of water or not so much, it's probably going to be an $80 charge from us. And that we pay deputies. We have 3 deputies in the field. Well, actually part-time deputies also. We have deputies that read wells in the fall, and actually we're reading more wells all the time. So we have to pay for that expense plus managing it. Just managing the records of water right ownership costs money. and it costs time. So we charge for that. So then, but once it leaves the river, it goes into an irrigation district or a canal company. And the Wood River Valley Irrigation District is the big canal that comes in kind of out of the south end of Bellevue, out of the Big Wood River. And so they are responsible to deliver the water once it leaves the source, and they shepherd that water to its rightful owners. So the Wood River Valley Irrigation District south of Bellevue is an example. And so they have their assessment, and because they're cleaning ditches, maybe making alterations to their system, whatever they need to do, delivering the water when it gets there. And they also have ownership records that they have to keep. So they have an assessment for their water. So let's say an individual has a water right out of the Big Wood River and it's delivered to the Wood River Valley Irrigation District. They are going to get a bill from Water District 37 and the Wood River Valley Irrigation District. So that's two bills you would have got. Now, groundwater districts are a little different cat. They were developed so the Wood River Valley isn't the first area where groundwater and surface water have gone to war. Let's say they've entered, there's this altercation between surface water and groundwater. It started happening in the Eastern Snake Plain. So the state realized that those well users, those groundwater users, were all individuals, and they weren't within a canal company or weren't within an irrigation district. They probably weren't even within a water district, but they came up against surface water users who were very organized and had been organized for decades. And so the state realized that these groundwater users need to be able to form coalitions or entities where they can hire staff. Maybe it's legal staff. They need to hire attorneys to fight legal battles. They need to hire water experts who know how aquifers and surface water sources interact in order to argue a legal case. So the state developed groundwater districts where these groundwater users can come together as an organization and do the things they need to do, whether it's hire an attorney or an expert. And so they have a fee that they charge. So we have multiple users in Water District 37 who get a bill from us for their surface water. And they get a bill for their groundwater, because Water District 37 for 100 years has been managing surface water. And so we have all those accounts and all those owners. But now we have groundwater users that have been brought into Water District 37. So we keep that separate. Surface water and groundwater assessments are separate. So a water user moves into, let's say, the Bellevue Farms home or Bellevue Farm subdivision. So they have a surface right out of the Big Wood River. And that water goes down the Wood River Valley Irrigation District Canal. So they're getting those bills. And he also has a well, let's say, and that's very common in Bellevue Farms. So he would get another $80 assessment from me for his well. So now he's got $160 from Water District 37, one for his surface, one for his ground. And then he's got another assessment for the groundwater district because his well is probably protected by the South Valley Groundwater District or the Galena Groundwater District. We have two groundwater districts in the basin. So he might get a bill from those. So he's got another assessment to those. And then he might also get a bill from Wood River Valley Irrigation District. So that water user is like, what? I thought I paid this. No, you didn't pay all of it. So those are things that you might see, especially if you're in the northern part of the Bellevue Triangle. So,
let's see. Just a quick question. For the Wood River Irrigation Canal, you said south of Bellevue, is that the one that comes out in the Howard Preserve?
Yes, that's the one.
So the big canal that heads kind of southeast then?
Yes.
That's that one that you're talking about.
That's the Wood River Valley Irrigation District.
Okay.
Yeah. And those of you out there, you may hear it called the D45. It's and then some people call it the District 45, and then they get that kind of confused with District 37. And John Wright, he's the manager, Watermaster for the Wood River Valley Irrigation District. He makes a point to tell me it's the diversion 45. It's not the District 45. So John, I'm speaking up for you. Okay. Yeah. And the 45 number is, that's diversions on the Big Wood go in order. Like, let's say the Trail Creek diversion for the Sun Valley Golf Course. That's Trail Creek number 1. And then they've got another diversion. It's, I think, Sun Valley 2. And then there's another diversion, it's the McCoy 3. So they went down when they first were developing water in this valley. Well, the Wood River Valley Irrigation District, it was diversion number 45. And so, but people get that kind of mixed up sometimes. They call it the District 45, and it's kind of a confusing anyway. So anyway,
Great.
so that's all I've got. I mean, what are we in here?
We've got more questions.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Sandy's asking if you could explain who has the right to control the ditch gates, the actual physical turning on and off. And then I have a question along with that is, how do you tell if somebody's taking more water? How do you actually measure that?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so when it comes out of the source, the water district has the authority. They manage the head gate. But in times when we're making, like in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be moving a lot of water pretty quickly. And so the deputy that's in that area might not be able to make it to every one of them in a day. So I say, okay, modern technology, we're going to send a text and we're going to say, Joe, Jim, and John, you need to be at these levels. And in every bigger canal, we have what we call a staff gauge. And it's just like a big white ruler that sets in the canal. Mm-hmm. And based on that, however deep that water is on that white ruler, we know how much water is in there. And I'll go into that in a second. But so then if our deputy sends out that message and he's going through the valley and he gets to that canal and that water hasn't been adjusted yet, he will usually call and say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and adjust it down to where it needs to be. So it's a lot of cooperation between the water district and the irrigation district, or the diverters will work together. But most of the time, Water District 37 should be making the adjustments, but it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes the users are making the changes to help us out and get it done. So
it's a cooperation between the users and you folks, and depending on how busy you are and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So those bigger diversions that I'm talking about, they will have what we call a rated section. And for the last 100 years, the Watermaster has had a flow meter that he can measure the depth of the stream, and then, the cross section of the stream in a particular spot. And then it's got a little wheel on it that spins. That's the old technology that I use. There's newer like sonar that can do it, but this little wheel that spins and it tells me how fast the water is running. So let's see, the water has a cross section of 100 square feet, but the water is moving at 2 feet per second. So that tells me I have 200 cubic feet per second. And so that's a unit of measurement for flow. So that's how we can tell in a rated section. And so then I might make that measurement and I find it has 200 cubic feet per second. And then I look over at the white ruler and it says, okay, the water is 1.5 feet deep. And then over the years, I can always be taking measurements in that rated section and say, okay, at this CFS, I have this gauge height, or this is my reading on the white ruler. And so then we make this what we call a discharge table or a output table, and it tells us basically when the water is so deep, that's how much flowing volume we will have. That's a rated section. And then in the smaller diversions, we have other different kind of measuring devices like weirs or a submerged orifice. But basically those are all, what's the word I'm looking for? Standard sized openings. It might be under the surface of the water might be pouring through it, but it's a standard size opening of some kind. And we know if there's so much depth, or what we call head pressure, moving through that device, we know how much water is there because scientists from Italy by the name of Cipoletti, they developed the Cipoletti weir, or the Parshall flume was developed by a guy named Parshall. So we have those devices also that tell us exactly how much water's going through. We use those everywhere all the time. Yeah.
So I don't know if you can answer these questions. We had somebody earlier ask about turning off lawn sprinklers. And I think I shared with you just before we started talking that that I collect data for the National Weather Service and report it to them on one of their websites. And I went back to the 1st of October and tallied up the amount of precipitation. It's called the liquid equivalent. So whether it's snow or hail or rain or whatever, that's the liquid equivalent. And just from the 1st of October to yesterday, in Bellevue, we've only had 7.2 inches of precipitation. So that's 9 months, just basically 7 inches of precipitation, and average would be around 15 inches in a whole year. So 9 months into this year, we're about half of what a full year would be at this time. So and then the other thing I wanted to mention is I received a notification from the city of Bellevue that not only are we going to every other day, which, you know, depending on your street address, they're asking us, depending on where our home is located, north of a particular street or south of a particular street, if we will water either in the evening or in the morning hours. So it's not just a odd day, even day thing, but it's also the time, and that's even being divvied up. So one of the questions we had earlier was, are we going to need to turn off our lawn sprinklers this summer? I mean, it's looking pretty grim, just in general, but how does that work? How does that work like with municipal water?
That's a really good question. So it's called a call. When senior surface water users call on a junior, it's called a call. The call that we are dealing with, the director of the Department of Water Resources said, okay, the only wells that are in the call are in the southern part of the Bellevue Triangle, from the Glendale Road south. Those are really the only ones that are being threatened right now that could possibly go off. That doesn't mean in the future that they wouldn't someday go north of the Glendale Road. That could happen if we still continue through dry seasons, dry years, dry climates. Now, as far as municipals, it may get to the point someday where lawn irrigation might not be allowed. I mean, most of you probably have been in Arizona or Southern California at times. Yeah, and they just don't have lawns. It's just not part of their culture. It's not part of their systems. They have gravel, and maybe they have a swimming pool with a cover over it. And so municipals, the in-home use, you know, drinking water, septic type stuff, I don't think that would ever be limited, but there may be an issue when someday it may not just be a call. It may just be because maybe the Bellevue City wells or the Haley City wells just can't produce enough water anymore. So they'd say, okay, we got to limit this somehow, or we won't be able to have a city here. We'll have to stop lawn irrigation or whatever, but not this year. I really probably wouldn't even see it in the next 5 years, but I mean, it's a possibility, but not right away. No.
So back to when you were talking about calling, so what is, I guess I just can't put my mind around, what does it mean when it's a water call?
So it's basically the senior surface or a senior user. It doesn't have to be surface that gets ground. It might be someday that it's groundwater versus groundwater. And the one or the individual with the senior right, if he is short, he calls the authority like the Watermaster of a water district and says, I want my water. And then now we have informal calls like every day in a year like this from the water district, but we already know the process. And so we'll go to the junior user in the surface systems and say, hey, we need to turn down to this level. So that's an informal call that we handle all the time. But usually when we're talking about a call, it refers to something that's going to the courts. There's going to be a legal argument between senior users of some source and junior users that are related somehow. And that is it. You know, I'm kind of using layman's terms as far as what that. There may be a more sophisticated term that's used in the court system, but we just call it a call. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your questions. I feel like I'm talking.
No, you are. There was something in the way you said that helped me to understand. So is that what's going on in these proceedings that we've been reading about in the paper and that you gave expert testimony for, that there was somebody in the Bellevue Triangle that has senior rights and is making that kind of call that you just described?
No, actually the senior callers are down here between Richfield and Shoshone all the
Oh,
way to
okay.
Gooding on the Littlewood River. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what I talk about, where it's like, how do we know if a well user is actually injuring a well user in the Bellevue Triangle? Are they really injuring a water right on the lower Littlewood 35 miles away? And so there's been a ton of science put into it. There's been
Mm.
legal arguments made about it. So yeah, it's not anybody in the Bellevue Triangle calling on somebody else in the Bellevue Triangle. This callers are actually down on the lower Littlewood between Richfield and Gooding.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just look at the questions. Yeah, we have several questions. One person said you didn't quite answer your gate question, the one about who actually physically shuts the gate. So maybe you could summarize that just a teeny bit.
Okay, so actually who would do it for us is a deputy watermaster. The guy in charge in the Wood River side is a guy named Ryan Fox. He's employed by Water District 37. And then there's a deputy that runs the Silver Creek area. That's Skip Schaefer. He actually turns the head gates off and adjusts them. And maybe they want to turn on in the spring. Those deputies will be overseeing that. Um, but like I said earlier, it's still kind of a cooperative effort when it gets busy between the water district and a canal user. Now, if it's an individual that's diverting out of a stream, they would call us and let us know. Sometimes, there's not great communications, and there'll be some water users that might stay on or just turn on. And I'm not denying that there might even be illegal diversions going on at times that we don't know about, but I mean, that's our job to always look for them and find them. But the water district controls the head gate, the actual turning on of the head gate or turning off. That's usually handled by deputies. I am actually managing some head gates on the lower Littlewood right now between Shoshone and Gooding. So I actually make the adjustments. I write the measurements down every other day. Deputies will go to the head gates and write those measurements down of how much water is being used. I'm not sure if I'm still answering that question very well, but
I think so. We do have some other questions about irrigation, but I just have a quick question for you. How big is the staff in your office?
it's just me and an office manager. There's just two of us.
Okay.
We're not sure if we can keep that down that low. We try to control costs, but if
Yeah.
we have more staff, it's probably going to be in the field. More of the
Okay.
staff, yeah.
So the deputies, you like deputize them to
The state
work for
actually
the.
did. I get. I don't know if I get a certificate every year, but I don't really deputize anybody and make them hold their hand up or anything. The state makes our employees go through some kind of Watermaster training,
Mhm.
and then they offer them a certificate of education or completion when they do that.
Okay. So here are just a few questions. Okay, we got
Sure.
that one. We got that one. Here we have a question. What are the consequences for non-compliance? And I'm guessing that is if you have a homeowner or farmer or whatever that's just not playing by the rules and not being cooperative.
Yeah. It hasn't come to any gunfights yet, but and that's old stuff. I think Kristen and I were talking about the other day. There was actually dynamite involved in one incident way back when in Quigley Canyon, I think it was. But we'll work with a water user and say, hey, you need to shut off. And if they don't cooperate, we will lock them off with a padlock and a chain. They have, besides the measuring devices that I was talking about earlier, we have head gates where it's basically a valve connected to the river, and it lets water pass from the river into a canal. And if the person, we usually try to remain as flexible as we can in this day and age, but if it comes to it, we'll lock them off with a chain and keep them shut. I've never had a chain cut. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Somebody in the middle of the night, if they think that they can get away with it, they might cut it. But that's never happened. There are times. A few years ago, the state started taking aerial photography and identifying lands that were being irrigated without a water right, and they would get a hold of the water user or the landowner and basically tell them that you need to get a hold of us and explain what you're doing. If you don't have a water right, we will start proceedings. If you don't get a hold of us, there will be fines, and those are administered from the state level, out of Boise or out of Twin Falls. The state will step in and fine, and the fine is based on the amount of water that you're using every day, and it's pretty substantial. It'll be in the several $100 range depending on the amount of water. Yeah, but that's what happens if there is illegal use.
Excuse me, let me admit someone right now. Okay, thank you for that. Let's see. So when you said you lock the gate, do you like turn it all off, or do you just set it to what their allocated water amount is?
Yeah, it would depend, as the river comes down, we're setting it at the allocated amount. And
Okay.
then there'll be a lot of diversions that will be off here in a couple of weeks on the
Mhm.
Big Wood River. And so they'll just be locked shut. There might be a little bit of water seep through the gates, especially if they're made out of wood, but the water won't go anywhere. It'll go down the stream maybe 100 yards and then sink into the ground. But yeah, for the most part, they will be locked completely off until next
Okay.
year. Or
Oh,
unless
wow.
there's rains that come along in September or something, we might be able to turn some of them back on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's see. Jennifer asks, does the state of Idaho own the water that I use with my private well?
Yes. Yeah. They still own it. They just give you the right to a domestic right that you can use it
Mm,
in your house and in your lawn. Yeah. But the state still owns it. Yeah.
okay. And then, oh, and same person. And how much water from my well am I allowed to irrigate my lawn?
13,000 gallons a day. And that's a lot of water for a half an acre. That's a lot of water.
Mhm.
Yeah. Or
So each person that would have a private well, um, it's implied that they could use it to water an acre, even if they
half,
just have a half an acre,
half an acre. Yeah.
even if it's just they have just a little parcel of land.
Well, no, if let's say you owned most, let's say we would say lots, like 100-foot by 150-foot lot. That's most of the time delivered by a municipal system. But if you
Hmm.
had just like a third of an acre in the country and you had your own domestic well, then you could only irrigate that third of an acre. But then,
Oh,
I mean, I don't mean to get complicated, but your house is out of that, your driveway is out of that third of an acre. So you might end up only irrigating maybe a tenth of an acre when you have the
hmm,
footprint of the house out of it. So yeah,
okay.
you wouldn't have you wouldn't have a half an acre right, because then you'd be spilling over onto the neighbor
You
with his
would.
cows or whatever, his
The grass
dog.
is greener on the other side,
Yeah.
or
So yeah, it would just be to the size of lot you have then. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm looking at questions, and I think we caught everything. So so I'll wait just a second or two in case someone has a last minute question or wants clarification on something.
Yeah.
Um, so apparently not. So thank you very much, Kevin, for taking the time to join us today and explain so clearly this complicated topic of water rights and Idaho law and how it affects each of us personally. Um, appreciate it very, very much.
Yeah.
Real
Well,
addition.
I'll have to swing
Mhm.
by the Haley Library and meet you in person someday.
That would be delightful. I would like
Yeah.
that. All
Yeah.
right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I hope your summer isn't too terribly busy. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here tonight. And
Okay.
just remember, this will be lightly edited front and back, and then uploaded to the Haley Public Library website, usually within a couple of days. Um, so again, thank you very much, Kevin.
You bet. Glad to be
All right.
here.
All right. Night, everybody.